What is up, YouTubes? Time to dive into Magic's latest expansion set, Kaldheim, and explore this Norse mythology related set for all its Viking draft and pre-release goodness, assuming you have some way to enjoy the set, whether it be in paper or online like MTG Arena. Now, if you want to know more of the background, mechanics, and get a general overview of the set and its design, check out my set overview video, but here we are jumping right into what you need to know for playing Limited, which I assume is usually draft, but it's also perfect if you're jumping into pre-release or a sealed event as well. I'll go through the best commons for each color, talk about each archetype, their ideal plays, along with their path to victory, then end with talking about the draft format, deck building ideas, cards to keep in mind like combat tricks, and all kinds of other pertinent info you need to know as we better understand Magic's newest set, Kaldheim. On to the best commons for each. With white, we're going to start with Goldmaw Champion, Bound in Gold, and Iron Verdict. Goldmaw Champion is great at making blocking difficult, and having 3 toughness makes it harder to get off the board. The removal A common is solid too, also giving us a Foretell synergy with Iron Verdict. A couple other creatures I want to call out though. We have a pushed 1-drop with Battlefield Raptor, who loves equipment, and Story Seeker is a nice 2-power 2-drop, which in this set is great. More on that later. Now let's jump into blue, which is one of the deepest colors at common. Our best options to be aware of are Raven Form, Augury Raven, and Bind the Monster. Wizards can't help itself when it comes to breaking the color pie and making sure blue wants for nothing. And in this set, blue has more than enough interaction and solid creatures at common to make it a top color. For black, our top commons would be Feed the Serpent, which is one of the best commons in the set, although harder to splash. Then we have Skull Raid, which it having Foretell is a bonus, but the fact it is never a dead draw makes this far better than we're used to. And then I also like Way Down quite a bit, although you do need some help to cast it, needing a creature in the graveyard to exile. Then other top creature options I would say be aware of would be Death Knell Berserker if you're in a aggro black build, and Jarl of the Forsaken because a flash removal body with Foretell is probably going to be perfect for you in plenty of situations. For red, the best commons are Frostbite, which easily has some of the best art in the set and takes care of a majority of the creatures in the set if you have those 3 or more snow permanents. Demon Bolt is good removal, also having that Foretell option. And then Tuscary Firewalker is our 3rd best because it helps red not run out of gas. I gotta mention too, even though it is wicked expensive, Cinderheart Giant is a beast. If you can land it and attack with it, that can swing the game in your favor real quick. For green, our biggest targets at common are Sarulf's Packmate. It's a solid body that draws us a card and gives us a Foretell option. Yes, please. Struggle for Skemfar, pumping a creature of ours and removing another one is just top tier good and limited. And then we have to mention Horizon Seeker, because it's a brilliant card, especially if you're splashing to ensure you've hit your land drops and it gets you ahead on cards. I have to mention Snakeskin Veil too, because it will be critical to certain archetypes and is a fantastic protection spell for just about any green deck. For colorless, we do have a couple to call out. Funeral Longboat is a card you definitely want in token or aggro decks. It just gives purpose to those tokens and is one of the few 3 power and 3 toughness creatures in the entire set, especially being 2 CMC and at common. Scorn Effigy should not be overlooked either. It's a 2/3, so it's a solid blocker body on the battlefield. It also lets us activate Foretell or second spell synergies quite easily, so it certainly has its place in the right builds. Now let's jump into the archetypes and chat about the 2 color pairings and what their game plans are. Starting with white-blue, the biggest advantages here are our flying creatures and building card advantage. It also leans into the new mechanic Foretell as much as any other archetype. Our Golden Owl is one of the best gold cards in the set, assuming you can trigger it even a couple times, because card advantage is huge and limited. And aside from our gold cards, Cosmos Charger is that card we want every time we play this deck because of how much value it provides for all of those Foretell plays we hopefully have. Sometimes a turn 2 Foretell into turn 4 God's Hall Guardian is enough to shut down an aggro game plan, but if not, yeah, just don't be relying on greedy Foretell spells to eventually get you there because you may run out of time. We can also lean into the snow value game plan with cards like Ascendant Spirit, which grows and becomes far more effective as we pump snow mana into it. The snow lane is pretty strong if you get the payoffs, as is Foretell. Take time when deciding when to Foretell cards, as those decisions will ultimately get you ahead in your games. And take advantage of your flyers, because that evasiveness is really hard to deal with in this set, especially when we get outside of white and green colors. Now, white-red is our dwarven friends, and they are focused on equipment and the new mechanic Boast. It is shockingly an aggro color pair. Our gold cards help us find equipment and make those equipped creatures far more difficult to deal with. When it comes to boasting, look for creatures like Burgi, Dragonkin Berserker, or Frenzied Raider to keep building on your lead. A couple things to keep in mind. A creature's boast ability is something you can only pay for after it's declared as an attacker. You can wait for blockers to be declared, and maybe waiting to use your mana may give you a greater intimidation factor that hopefully causes your opponent to make a less than ideal decision. But some boast abilities like Gold Maw Champions are only useful before blockers are declared. So slow down and think through what scenarios seem likely before charging forward and spending your mana. Or don't, because it's a Viking set and we should be full sending anyway to get to Valhalla ASAP, right? Great. Switching lanes, green-white is our humans and go wide goodness color pair. There's also a good amount of 1/1 counters to go around, especially in green, but we of course need to have creatures there to put them on. Our gold cards are all perfect at meeting the same game plan too, with Maja being tremendously helpful with their pseudo landfall effect. Cards like Asika's Chariot, Sigrid God Favored, and of course a card like Battle Mammoth are cards we would love to have in this archetype. The game plan is straightforward, but I think this color pair can struggle to close out games because more often than not, we're having to build up our advantage over time, which gives our opponent time to find an answer. That's especially true if we're pumping a lot of counters onto the same creature. If our opponent has well-timed removal or a difficult blocker to get around, we can really stall out. So protection like Snakeskin Veil will be invaluable to protecting our win cons as well as us timing our removal to keep getting through. Now blue-green is actually the most focused on the Shapeshifter Changeling synergies and has a good amount of snow payoffs too. However, quick rant here, Kaldheim has a lot of mechanics and synergies going on, but they do not run as deep as we've seen in sets like Zendikar Rising. Granted, having changelings around makes tribal synergies more likely to hit or add value in your deck, and with the color fixing in green makes this one of the best color pairs to benefit or be able to benefit from splashing. Also, if you're going the snow game plan here, Horizon Seeker, Jorn, God of Winter, and Spirit of the Alderguard are must drafts. However, this will be one of the harder lanes to plow through successfully because you have to prioritize the snow lands and the other spells you need, but with how solid the creatures are, the incremental advantages from having these snow permanents can be more than enough to put your opponent on ice. Okay, enough puns, moving on. Changing gears, white-black is Angels and somewhat interested in casting that second spell in a turn, albeit not something we should bank on to occur often, but the more you lean into it, the more foretelling you'll probably need, as well as focusing on a lower curve. Our sagas help on multiple fronts, but be aware that Ascent of the Worthy only works if that creature is around. So if you attack and it gets removed, or your opponent has something with First Strike that deals enough damage to remove it, well then the rest of your creatures may be having a bad time. I think this archetype is being slept on a bit because of the lack of interaction with flying in the set outside of white and green. That means flyers are going to be really annoying to deal with. Couple that with the fact that 4 toughness in this set is also very difficult to deal with, especially with one card. So Righteous Valkyrie, Starnheim Unleashed, and Eradicator Valkyrie are all so good. If you manage to find a copy for your build, they can carry your creatures to victory on their own. Hopefully most matchups wind up going heavenly for you. I said I was done with the puns. Oh well. Blue-black enjoys some good self-mill zombies and snow benefits too. Having cards in our graveyard is important, and if we can get the right cards in our graveyard, we should have no trouble closing out games, which is what our gold cards all help with. We get stuff where we want it, maybe it's even on our side of the board, but this archetype definitely seems like it is going to be quite fun to play. Also, the legendary creatures and snow creatures in this color pair are pretty nuts, like Draugr Necromancer, Tergrid, God of Fright, and Icebreaker Kraken. If the board does get gummed up, which I think this color pair wants more than any other, cards like Dreadrider, Dogged Pursuit, and Frostspeak Yeti can wither anyone down. Blue and black also have a lot of interaction, but if your game plan is to stall, don't use that removal unless you absolutely have to. Save it for those big bombs you will not be able to outlast. Blue-red is probably my favorite archetype because it's finally not just focused on spells matter, but rather giants and excess damage. It also has the biggest oxymoron I've seen in Magic in a while. Undersea Invader is a giant rogue that requires a lot of explaining, but anyway, if we get to the mid to late game, it should be impossible for anyone to outvalue us, but we can be slow to set up with most of our big value plays costing 3 to 5 mana minimum. Getting beat in the air could happen, as could an opponent going wide and getting in under us, but as long as we grab some of the multiple answers we have available to us in the set, like Crush the Weak, or our Saga Battle of Frost and Fire, we can absolutely obliterate any opponent. I mean, Cyclone Summoner is a win con by itself, letting you Alpha Strike or essentially remove all tokens your opponent's played, or resetting everything else on their board while adding a 7/7 to yours. It just feels like this archetype is in a great position for this set. Doesn't need to be too greedy with Foretell, it has plenty of options to combat aggro, it's just a really solid play to squash your opponents. Another game plan, looking to also be big and bad, is green-red. They have a loose tribal focus on trolls and on creating tokens, Sphella, Ice Shaper makes splashing very doable by providing some ramp, which also helps us get to its second ability, which is pay 8 mana and tap it to cast something for quote-unquote free. Really, this archetype just wants to fight. Our sagas are about fighting, our trolls want to boast in combat, and they don't mind hitting themselves to get pumped up for battle. It's probably one of the less exciting game plans by itself, but splashing in some other fun stuff can really make this an attractive color pairing to jump into. Green-black is elves and self-mill. I don't know how else to describe it other than saying this archetype feels like the most resilient archetype in the set. They replace themselves, they build each other up. You know, they don't mind doing their own dirty work. It's more about doing what it takes to get the win. And we find help with rares like Elvish Warmaster, Saruf Realm Eater, and then one of the new planeswalkers in this set, Tyvar Kel, can give us that inevitability factor as our board grows. But I still think this matchup will be all about perseverance. There will be a challenge in figuring out how you can be the last one standing and get in for those final points of damage. Maybe it's trample or pump spells, but either way, there should be no threat you can't handle and no creature you can't eventually outmatch or trade with. Then our last archetype is Vikings, or red-black, which is more Berserker, I guess. I don't have much else to share here besides this is also a very similar game plan to what we've seen in prior sets. Be aggro, we are Vikings, sorry, Berserkers, whatever. We can make our opponent attack, we can make tokens, we can sacrifice tokens however we need to get ahead. This is as chaotic an archetype as we'll see in the set, and Tibalt being back is very, very fitting. Do we care if we win? Sure, but that's only going to happen if the game is memorable and stuff is dying all over the place. If you liked Ravnica and or you liked Rakdos, this is the archetype for you. Speaking of Ravnica, let's talk about the format's speed and archetype rankings. When it comes to the speed of play and pacing for this set, expect Kaldheim to initially play similar to or even a bit slower than the Ravnica sets we saw not too long ago, with some caveats. And I say this because of the two new mechanics we have. Boast leads to super obnoxious aggro strategies. These happen most often in white-red and black-red, which will constantly be testing their opponent's early game preparations. If they curve out, and you do not, or you don't have removal or bodies to at least trade with them, say turns 2, 3, and or 4, you may not be able to catch up and the game is over before you know it. This means when drafting any deck, 2 power 2 drops will be essential to any build. Curving out is always nice, but what will slow down the format at first is the fact that most 3-drop creatures only have 2 or 1 toughness, meaning those 2 power 2 drops can often trade up as blockers. So aggro game plans that don't have ideal draws or nice curve outs are more likely to get stabilized against than we've seen before. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have Foretell, which may require you to spend your early turns doing close to nothing, but then have an explosive turn 4 or 5. Spending mana for no immediate benefit certainly slows things down in the early to mid game, but in the late game, they can go from 0 to 100 real quick. If your opponent is doing this, be sure to be ready for good synergy cards and take those out ASAP to hopefully slow them down. And then being mid-range should mean we can close the door on someone who built too greedy of a Foretell deck or really stumbles on their aggro game plan. But I do suspect as the format is better understood, especially on Arena, the format may get a bit more aggressive as people understand those payoffs and the lines that get you there. Personally, I hope mid-range stays the meta or is more the norm, but I'd love to know your thoughts and what you think the pace of the format will be or is when you're watching this video. Let's start to wrap this up with some draft tips. This set does not have as deep a strategy payoffs, so there's a lot of good cards in the set, and when I'm drafting, I'm focused on staying open and drafting good cards more than I was with, say, Zendikar Rising. I will also look to splash and stay open as late as possible, because with it being a slower format, you definitely need your own bombs and the higher value plays, which splashing often lets you do, and the lack of deep synergies, I'd say, lessens the sacrifice for doing so. And to splash, we have snow dual tap lands, some modal choice lands, and an ETB tapped snow land that can produce one chosen color. These, along with some creatures, primarily in green, make it very doable in the set. So yeah, splashing in the snow game plans will be very powerful, but it's also going to be the hardest to draft well because those are going to have competing priorities in a draft between do you pick the snow land or do you pick the good spell. When I start a draft, I usually pick the bomb over the removal just because I value them so highly in this set, especially in those slower matchups. You just gotta have your win con. Now moving on to deck building and gameplay, my deck building default is playing 17 lands because I want to hit my higher costed spells or be able to do multiple things in a turn as quickly as possible. I will also say slow down. We have a lot of demands on our mana in this set, so don't rush a decision or play, and I'm saying this because I'm especially prone to it when playing on Arena to just rush through what I'm doing. Try and think through scenarios and make sure whatever you're doing is putting you in the best position to close out a game. With regard to combat tricks, there's a handful of 1 CMC combat tricks, but the bigger threat is when your opponent starts foretelling spells. Those combat tricks can be far more impactful than we're used to seeing for 1 mana. At times, you have to make them have it or use it, because if you don't, you may just be giving them time and ultimately waiting to lose. That never feels good. But also, don't just walk into a blowout. And thankfully, there aren't many counter spells to worry about in the set, so I would not be all that timid about just playing what you have, especially in best of one. So I'm going to end on a really random note. There are more board wipes in this set than any other I can think of in recent memory. We've got, give or take, 6 or 7 that can really do some damage to a wide board. So in best of one, especially be prepared to rage if you're in that token deck or play a lot of the same creature types and or low toughness creatures. But yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you for watching. Thank you to Card Kingdom for the sponsorship, and check them out if you need some specific cards or a box to draft with friends. They're the best place to go online for all your Magic needs. Patrons, y'all are awesome, and if you're not one, maybe you should be. But I really appreciate you all making this content possible. We'll see you in the next video, folks. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll look for you in the comments. Take it easy. Peace.